Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Anti-Doping Podcast, brought to you by the Partnership for Clean Competition. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and today we are thrilled to be joined by our guest, Dr. Jennifer Royer. Listeners, Jen is the TrueSport Awareness Senior Director at the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, or USADA. And today we're looking forward to discussing her career and doing a deep dive on USADA's TrueSport program. So, Jen, welcome to the show today. How are you?
Doing well, Marie. Thanks so much for the warm introduction. I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Well, we are so excited to have you and to learn more about you and the important work that you're doing. So, Jen, can you start by telling us just a little bit more about yourself and perhaps how you got interested in education and sport?
Thanks so much for the invitation to talk a little bit about the pathway into education and sport. I live in a house full of teenage guys who rarely ask, Mom, tell me a little bit more about yourself. So this is a great opportunity. So yeah, thanks. I have had a really, really wonderful experience in career working with educational initiatives, everything from public school, high school. I taught at the collegiate level. I've done some collegiate administration and have always known that engagement in growth and learning and development and sort of improvement and constant growth has been really important to me personally. I was a former athlete, and I say former as generously to myself as possible. The most athletic thing I do, I think these days, is try to get my groceries in one haul. I've long since hung up my competitive gene there, but sport has always been super important to me. I was a 3-sport athlete as a kid and coached for many years. I'm married to a partner who is a long-term career coach, and it is a part of our world. I've had sons who are incredibly active and very engaged in sport. And I think through all of that, just seeing the interplay of how great coaches are really great educators, and great educators understand the value of growth and the challenges that sport brings. It lets you grow, not just as an athlete, not just physical literacy and development there and performance, but really just the life lessons you learn. I think I am a better person because I had the gift of sport in my life. I see that in the people that I care most about. And then the opportunity to do that here with the work at USADA, where we really invest in advocating for athlete needs, understanding that sport is so much bigger. It's culturally a phenomenon. It's not just about individual performances. It's really about seeing the best of ourselves in humanity through this striving and achievement and failure and glory and loss. And it's just a beautiful mix of what it is to be human. I know that's a little philosophical right off the bat, but it's really important to me, and it's important to USADA to invest in the lessons that sport can teach. And it's just a really awesome thing to show up every day and really live out those values in practice and devote energy to those efforts.
Well, Jen, I love that. And you mentioned a 3-sport athlete yourself. What sports did you play?
So I was a diver, I was a track athlete, and then I ran cross country. To be fair, I only did cross country because I felt like that was important for me for track. I am not a long distance kind of individual. Mm-hmm. I was a sprinter, so I liked to go from point A to point B real fast. And I would be willing to turn left twice, but that's about it for me. So I did cross country to stay in shape for track, but I was a swimmer, diver, and an athlete who ran.
Oh, wonderful. I think those athlete experiences, as you alluded to, can be tremendously valuable, not only during your sporting career, but later on in life as well. And I know you've had a unique path to your position in anti-doping. So Jen, can you maybe walk us through the steps of your career that brought you to USADA?
What a kind way to say that I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I really appreciate the way that you phrased that. I do think that it has been a very serendipitous journey for me. As I mentioned, I started out in higher education. I have a PhD in something that has absolutely nothing to do with what I do every day, which I think is how many people's PhDs end up. Mm-hmm. But I do appreciate that I had a PhD, taught at the collegiate level for a number of years, discovered that I really loved the high school age, the developmental opportunities that were happening there, decided to step away from higher ed, spent some time there in teaching high school, coaching high school, and just really loved what was happening when I was coaching at those life choice stage development areas that were really, really formative for folks. I loved the opportunity to pour into young people's experience and see what they did with it, because really it's just about getting them great tools and then letting them run with it. And that was just such a really formative experience for me in my career. And then It's been 7 years now. I don't know how that happened so fast, but about 7 years ago, I was having some conversation with our CEO, Travis Tigert, who I happen to know in the community. And we were talking about the work that USADA does in education and their commitment to best practice and really wanting to have some folks involved on the front lines of educational theory who'd been involved in classroom education and school-based sport coaching and that sort of thing. And they were just going to restructure education and they had some opportunities. And I thought, what the heck? I'm going to apply. And it was and has been an incredibly life-changing event to be a part of this phenomenal organization, to get to come, as I mentioned earlier, into a workplace every day where there is absolute commitment to an ideal and there is just real advocacy on the part of what is best for athletes of all stages. Obviously, on the USADA side, we're focused on elite athletes at the Olympic, Paralympic, Pan American level. But what I love about USADA's view, and we can talk a little bit more about that as we talk about the origin story of TrueSport, is that they do believe that to make sport great at the elite level, you have to change the game at the developmental level, and you have to pour into the next generation in ways that create systems that are healthier, so that by the time they find themselves competing for a podium spot at an Olympic or Paralympic game, they have come through a sports system that is more just and equitable and fair, and that winning at all costs is no longer the currency, that it is about integrity and ethical participation and the values learned through sport. Because I think we all look at sport and want to see heroes. We want to see people who are somehow like us achieving things we don't know if we could ever achieve. And the moment that you believe that that's no longer authentic, that people have bet the rules or they've cheated their way or they have taken substances or used methods that are prohibited, it cheapens that experience for all of us. And we want to believe that sport is authentic and it's ethical. And just the opportunity to translate the work that I've done in education into a space like sport has been life-changing for me. And it's a real joy to come in every day and work with a team of people who very aggressively yet humbly tackle these big problems and hopefully make a difference for the future of sport.
Definitely. And Jen, I tremendously appreciate the work that you and the team there at USADA are doing every day. And I think your story, as well as many other stories that I've heard from others, really highlight that there isn't one quote unquote traditional path to a career in sport or anti-doping. And I think that's part of what makes the field so wonderful, is that people are coming with all of these different backgrounds. So let's maybe dig into your position in a little bit more detail. Can you share what you do, Jen, in your current role as TrueSport and Awareness Senior Director there at USADA?
I am incredibly fortunate. I get to work with 3 teams at USADA. I work with our elite education team, our communications team, and our TrueSport team. So when I look at the connectors there, it's messaging, it's educational initiatives, it's anything that's outward facing that's designed to inform, to advocate, and to educate around clean sport, around ethical participation and the values and life skills learned through sport. And I know that you're familiar with USADA. And if our listeners aren't, I think important to note that we have a really big mission and we have an ethic and ethos that is about doing that with a lean, focused, very singularly dedicated group of folks, but we do it lean. And so we have a pretty small team of folks working very much on that sort of nonprofit mentality where we have really, really audacious goals and a small team. And so we hustle. And those 3 teams are just filled with really wonderful folks who are idealistically and philosophically aligned with the values that USADA and TrueSport stands for, and come in every day and do great work, knowing that it's not great work that will ever necessarily land our names on the front page of a paper, but it is great work that hopefully creates a backdrop that lets athletes and their accomplishments shine, and that they know that we've got their back when they are trying to win the right way.
Definitely. And I think this idea of working really hard in the background is something that, you're right, many people don't see it, so they don't necessarily appreciate all of the things that you're doing. And I know in our previous episode, we had Greta Namanis on the show, and she briefly introduced TrueSport and just some of the education initiatives going on there at USADA. But I'd love to get into more of the details with you today. So Jen, can you tell us what the TrueSport program is and how it all started?
Absolutely. It's really fun to see how those 3 teams blend together. As I mentioned, I get to work with the communications, the elite education team, and the TrueSport team. And at USADA, we look at educational initiatives across this sort of continuum, the life cycle of an athlete. We know that most kiddos who step foot onto their first pitch or onto a track, or they pick up a bat or whatever their chosen sports are, and I say sports because I love multi-sport approach, it's very unlikely that they are going to end up in our testing pool at the elite level, right? We know the statistics that the multi-billion-dollar gigantic sport industry that is youth sport is enormous. And we know that most of those kids are not going to wind up Olympic, Paralympic, professional athletes. Most of them are not even going to play at the collegiate level. Many of them won't even play at the high school level. But we still believe that sport is transformative and it is foundational, regardless of how long they play, if we intentionally craft sport to be this really beneficial educational model. So TrueSport really is born out of that idea. To do a quick, and I'll try to keep it quick, which is hard for me because this is a passion project and I love to talk about it. But coming up on about 15 years ago now, USADA conducted some research and we put out a really cool report. If listeners are interested, it's on our website. It's really looking at what sport means in America. And that report, that research project, had a bunch of really meaningful findings. One of the ones that we were really struck by is this idea that the majority of parents who put their kids into sport believed that they were doing it because there were going to be lessons about life that came through. They were going to be character building opportunities. There were going to be perseverance and accountability and sportsmanship and all of those great sport values that I think we all love to see. 80-something% of families were like, yeah, we're doing this not because we believe our kid's going to play pro ball, but because we think they'll be a better person because of sport. And then a really, really disappointing percentage of parents felt that sport was delivering on that. That seemed like an unacceptable gap for us organizationally. Importantly, that at about that same time, USADA, on its testing and clean sports advocacy piece, was seeing a pretty significant uptick in terms of sports scandals. So, right, we're coming out of Balco. We're dealing with the USA Postal Services team in cycling. A lot of very visible issues where doping was a problem in sport. And so we look at this, we kind of, as an organization, landed on the idea that we didn't necessarily have a doping crisis in sport. What we had was an ethical gap in sport, and that sport wasn't upholding its larger mission. So how can we create a sport culture that is supportive of ethical competition, that is supportive of integrity-filled participation, values-based connection to sport? Well, you can't just test your way out of that. You have to come at it from all different angles. And education early and often seemed like a really important way to invest in sport culture so that it becomes more positive. If you have been to a youth sporting event in the last 10 to 15 years, it's not always ideal. There are often times where we see poor behavior on the sidelines. We see unkind behavior toward officials. It's really difficult to get officials to sign up to officiate youth sporting events these days. It is not always the best culture. And so we've decided to invest in youth sport culture to improve it in a way that hopefully sets our future elite athletes up for having had a great sports system to come through. And for all of those many, many, many thousands of young people who will never compete for an Olympic podium or a Paralympic podium, we believe that they will be community leaders. They'll be business owners. They'll be partners. They'll be educators. They'll be coaches themselves. They'll be spectators that will demand more of sport. And what we want to do is have had a sport culture that sets us all up for sport community that's better and filled with integrity and hope for the future.
I think that's fantastic. And it sounds like this report that you mentioned was a critical milestone 15 years ago. Can you talk a little bit about how the TrueSport program perhaps came into existence and then evolved over the years?
So I think coming out of that report, we did a lot of evaluation of what was going on in best practice around the globe. USADA is a global entity. We function as the U.S. National Anti-Doping Agency, but we partner and work closely with our colleagues around the globe. So we immediately started looking at where are other folks doing this differently? What's going on? We found some great models in places like Canada. We did some deep dive on how we invest in a uniquely American sports system, but bringing some best practice from educational fields, from coaching fields, from colleagues abroad. And we began to build a program that was about giving resources back to coaches and parents and athletes we've built, and we can talk about resources here in just a minute, but we've built a ton of resources at no or low cost. And we really do try to be as free of barriers as possible because we believe every kid deserves to have the best sport experience possible. We've built coach development training modules. We've built resources that include monthly content that goes out to our NGB partners. We have slowly and steadily built a partner network that includes a potential reach of over 21 million. So we are making progress in getting this information in front of folks who have the ability at the grassroots level to implement. And we're really proud of that partner program. Partnering is incredibly important to us. We work with, as I mentioned, school-based sport, club sport, our national governing bodies and their development models. We work with youth sport organizations like YMCAs, Boys and Girls Club. We try to be as available as possible with the kind of right on time, just the right message resources that are needed by folks who are showing up every day to give back to young people and make it as easy and pragmatic and approachable as possible.
Certainly. And then in terms of how it has changed or evolved over the years, it sounds like TrueSport has grown tremendously.
It has. And we're so excited by that growth. It's been a lot of fun to be a part of it for the last 7 years. It began very traditionally focused on the sort of values like sportsmanship and accountability and teamwork and the things that I think we would all universally agree are kind of no-brainers for the sport world. What's been interesting to me is over the last few years, we really listen closely to our stakeholders. And so we were hearing a lot from coaches and from families and from sport admin that, yeah, we've got a lot of that. We've really incorporated messaging around those things. We're struggling with some more complex issues, and we really could use some guidance on things like conflict resolution or body image. Or the big one that has really been meaningful for us the last 5 years or so has been around mental well-being and how sport can be sort of like a life lab, a place where you practice skills that are related to increasingly complex issues that our young people are facing. I mean, they're growing up in a sports world that is so very different than the one I grew up in, or that even some of our newer employees have grown up in, right? It's just the introduction of social media and the changing sport landscape around things like NIL, all of those shifts are trickling down quickly and are impacting our young people greatly. And we want to make sure that sport remains relevant and that it is a testing ground for best practice for them. It's where they practice failure. It's where they get really comfortable with managing difficult conversation. It's where they learn to contribute to team culture and to practice leadership. And over the years, we have tried to evolve to meet the needs of our stakeholders, knowing that they have got an increasingly complex sport landscape to navigate. And that as community becomes increasingly more difficult in some cases to establish and create and maintain, as our young people live increasingly more in digital spaces. And then certainly the post-COVID, and I'm grateful to say that sport is rebounding post-COVID. It looks a little different, but thank goodness our numbers are starting to leapfrog up again. But there was a massive loss of community that we suffered in the wake of a COVID world. And we've just really had to be intentional about how do we invest in that? How do we help teach young people who miss some of those practice times and pickup games and the sort of natural engagement where you test yourself and you push yourself and you grow and you compete and you do it in a really healthy way. They missed a lot of that for a couple of years, and trying to rebuild that and do it intentionally has been really important and a big part of our evolution.
Well, Jen, you brought up so many important points, and I'm so glad to hear that USADA has this mentality of responding and adapting to match the needs of this changing sport landscape. Like you mentioned, social media has been huge, and this name, image, and likeness concerns, NIL, is something that a lot of people are thinking about as they're moving kind of up the ranks in sport as well. So we've been saying we a lot, and I'd love to dive into this we in some detail. Let's talk about the TrueSport team. I know you mentioned that you've got a relatively small but dedicated team there. Can you tell us more about these individuals and some of the experts that you work with?
We have a team. We currently have 4 people on the team plus a third of me. So I laugh. I am probably the weakest link on the team there. But we have got this really small team, but really dedicated. And in order to be successful, we have got to align and partner well and strategically. And that's really important for our team in terms of creating efficacy and making sure that we are being great stewards of our resources and making sure that we can do the most great work with a streamlined resource availability and capacity. So I think that's really important for us. One of the ways we've done that, as I mentioned, is through our content development and our content sharing. The sharing part, let me jump into that first, and then we'll back up a little bit into the experts and the content creation piece. We share this out through distribution channels where athletes are authentically connected to either their school sport base or their club sport base or their national governing body, depending on the type of sport they're engaged in. They are likely more willing to listen to, take note of information coming from that governing body than they would be from an outside partner. And while we believe that we have great credibility and we know that we're dedicated and we're putting the effort into building great resources, there is an authenticity. There's a little more street cred if your coach is giving you something, right? Than this agency that you don't know the people that are engaged in the work. So we've really partnered closely with people who are mission aligned, people who believe like we do that sport is about ethical and safe and smart engagement. So all of the national governing bodies, those partners help us distribute the content and the trainings that we have. But the creation of that, really important for us, that it be incredibly well developed and that it be not just pragmatic and useful, but that it is expert informed and that it is data informed and research based. And we are a part of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. And if anybody's familiar with USADA, the science is critical for us. Science sets the tone for our policies and our procedures. We want to make sure that we're following the science. And that is true of social science for us as well as analytical science on the testing side. So we have tried to force multiply our little group of 4 1/3 by partnering with incredibly dedicated, smart, impactful experts in the field. So we've got licensed clinical psychologists and we've got physicians and we have got sports psych folks and we've got nutritionists. And the list is incredible. And if folks are interested, we'll talk, I'm sure, at the end about where they can find more. But goodness, go to TrueSport.org, check out our expert page. You will see we've got these national and international experts who are, because it is a passion project for them as well, so generous with their time, their knowledge, their expertise, so that every resource we develop is run through the lens of someone who is an expert in that field. We want to make sure that when parents or coaches or athletes tune into TrueSport resources, they know that we're not a basement blogger who's just throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. We genuinely are leaning into the science of what it is to do sport well. So those experts we're incredibly grateful for. We're really proud of the people who have been willing to walk alongside us. It's some of the best out there. And they are folks who are not only excellent in their chosen field, but they also believe deeply in the power of sport to make a difference in the world. And so they have been generous with their time and their expertise. And we're proud of the resources that we push out because we know that it stands on science.
Certainly. So Jen, let's talk more about the content and the resources that USADA and the TrueSport team are making. So who are the target audiences to start with for the TrueSport content? And what resources does the program provide for these different audiences that you serve?
Well, I think that we typically look at our audience segmentation in 3 spaces, and we've built our content program around that. Coaches, because our research has indicated that coaches have such an opportunity to influence and shape the experience of young people in their care, families, parents, and then athletes themselves. So when we look at coaches, we're also including sport administrators in there. So athletic directors, club owners, that sort of group as well. Of those sort of 3 tracks, we definitely have tried to be thoughtful. We don't want to try to be all things to all people, but we do want to make sure that we're robustly supporting those 3 audiences. When we look at coaches and sport admin, we've got a whole host of great resources for those folks, including the opportunity to do some online education, TrueSport coaching certifications. We monthly put out articles on a host of great topics that are usually really timely. We try to be thoughtful about the seasons of the year and what coaches and athletes are experiencing. Many of those resources are also really useful. We get a lot of great feedback from PE teachers, those that are involved in kinesiology space and movement intelligence space, that they are also finding great value in those. There are things like codes of conducts and train the trainers. There's just a ton of resources there to help make their jobs easier. Having been a coach, having lived my day to day with a career coach, and we're really plugged in with lots of coaches in this space. We know how pulled they feel and how many different directions and how full their plates are. So we try to build all of our resources for coaches, keeping in mind that one more thing on their plate may be the one more thing that is just too much. So we really want to make sure that it's plug and play. It is turnkey for them. It is ready to go. And then it's flexible because we know that every team is a little different. Every program, every school, every club's a little different. So we try to provide more than they need, but in a way that they can be thoughtful about, and it's easy for them to discern what they want to use in their practice and what they don't.
Definitely. And just to interject here, I think one thing that people struggle with is just the volume of content that's out there today. And one thing that I think USADA does really well is you sort of curate the content. So it's not just like you go into this abyss of resources. There are specific articles that are written specifically for coaches or educators or parents. And I think that's a really strong point as well.
Thanks for calling that out, Marie. I think it's really important. I think we have just abundantly robust catalog of resources. There are folks in the space who sort of act as a curator of other people's great content. We've really intentionally decided that we are not in existence to curate other people's content, that we wanted to generate our own because it is such a busy landscape. And we're also sort of like rising tides, lift all boats sort of approach. We know that there's a lot of great folks doing great work in this space. And we believe that because youth sport is such an enormous ecosystem, it's going to take the best efforts of a whole lot of folks and a bunch of different agencies doing great work to really move that needle. So we acknowledge that there are so many places people can get great resources. We've committed to building our own in-house because we wanted that quality assurance, that we knew that everything we put out there was connected to expert opinion, that it was backed by science, and that we had been very thoughtful about ensuring that the guidance we were giving was in alliance with what we stand for as an organization, what USADA's congressional mandate is, and what we believe to be best practice for the future of a sustainable sports system.
That makes sense. And then perhaps we'll pivot back to, before I interrupted you, we were talking about just the content strategy and the timing of the content that you're releasing.
Our monthly content program is sort of at the core of a lot of this. And we basically take a topic or a value per month and explore it deeply. And then we throw in a couple trending topics here and there. So we will have a month on resilience, or a month on conflict resolution, or nutrition, or supplements, or whatever it is. And then for each of those audiences, there will be a specific approach for parents or families, a specific approach for coaches, a specific approach for athletes. So we try to come at it from a different lens based on the audience, but the topic will be the same. Because what our young people are concerned about with regard to clean competition or supplement use might be very different from what our parent audience would be concerned about or what our coaching audience would be. But the topic is relevant across those stakeholder groups. And so we try to be very thoughtful about how we curate that information, how we build the platform to support it, but knowing that they might have conversation about that. So we've tried to have this sort of kernel that they can connect around. And if it is around supplements, which is a great one for us, obviously the connection with USADA, the risk of dietary supplements is such a key issue for us on the elite education side, as well as at the developmental sport level. We want to make sure that families, that coaches, that young people understand what risks they are engaging in and how they can mitigate that risk if they choose to take supplements, knowing that they are not an FDA regulated support for them. And so we just want to be thoughtful about that. We try to be targeted in the way that we message and make sure that the points that we're addressing in those articles or in those training materials, that it truly meets that stakeholder group where they are.
Certainly. And I know, Jen, you mentioned a few things earlier in terms of conflict resolution, body image, and mental well-being, some of these hot topics. But what are some of the other popular or high demand topics that athletes and other stakeholders are really interested in learning about right now that you guys are getting questions about?
I think that certainly the conflict resolution is a big one. I think just the world that our young people inhabit, I think they see a lot of less than civil behaviors, not just in their day-to-day, but in a sporting environment, right? I mentioned earlier, there's like a national crisis about how we get, retain, train, support great officials in this space. It has become not a very welcoming space for officials. It's not the most civil environment. And I think teaching our young people through sport how to navigate difficult conversation, how to navigate disagreement, how to navigate conflict through sport is really, really relevant. And we're hearing about that a lot from coaches. I mentioned nutrition. That's always a big one for us. How to fuel in healthy ways and what are things that will set our young people up for healthy behaviors well beyond their competitive experience. That's always a good one. I mentioned mental health. That has been phenomenally important for us at the elite level as well as at the developmental level. That has been sort of labeled as the crisis of this current generation. And you don't have to look much farther than the Surgeon General's warnings around these things. Sport has some really unique ways to help develop skills around resilience and mental wellness and well-being. We don't venture into the suicide prevention space. There's just lots of great organizations doing great work there. What we see sport as really well designed to do is all that lead up. It's that gap between I'm thriving and I'm struggling and I'm not okay. And that gap seems to be a really beautiful space for sport to step in, to develop intentional discussion and practice of those tools so that it is edifying these young people to be stronger, more resilient, and more aware, more regulated folks on the other side of it. And to that end, one of the biggest initiatives we've done in that space is our annual TrueSport Talks event. We've now come out of year 5 for that. And so much fun, such a great, rich conversation. We host it annually here in Colorado Springs at the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Museum. Because that space is limited in the number of folks we can host, we can only have about 130 people in that space. We have hosted it as a hybrid event. So we've got it both virtually and in person. And we have had thousands of people join us from around the globe for these conversations about specific ways that sport can help young people manage, understand, regulate their mental health and well-being through sport around issues like perfectionism, performance, identity. One of the things we've seen really as relevant and that coaches have been reaching out asking is, what do we do with transition? What do we do with injury? We're seeing kids who have either a career-ending injury or a season-ending injury, and all of a sudden their entire identity feels at stake and they're really struggling with it. And so sport gives us a tool to kind of talk about, what does a healthy, balanced identity look like? What does it look like if you have a really severe ankle sprain that takes you out for the season and you're no longer in practice, and all the inside jokes and the team community you feel left out of? How do we build that through development of young people? And so it's been really, really important. That one has been a dire need in the community and one that we've really felt proud of the effort to step into, invite experts to the conversation and build actionable resources around. And if folks have questions about that one, again, that's a great TrueSport.org. You can go to our TrueSport Talks event and access recordings from the previous 5 years. It is one of the things that I think we have seen ripple effects that we can't quite quantify, but we know are just absolutely making a difference for young people.
Absolutely. And I know we mentioned earlier that TrueSport was kind of developed originally to fill this ethical gap that I think is present all the way back to the earliest stages of sport. So let's maybe go into a little bit more detail next about youth sports education. So what are some of USADA's key priorities when it comes to youth sport education?
That's such a fun question to explore because there are so many possible avenues that you could take. And I love that USADA has been very intentional, very thoughtful about pouring our energy into culture. The TrueSport mission is to change youth sport culture and to make it more positive for young people. And through cultural shift, a lot of the other concrete pieces tend to work themselves out. So I really appreciate the dedication to sport culture that USADA has doubled down on, and really going against this idea that win at all costs is the desired outcome of competition. We laugh a lot. I think there are folks who are like, oh, great, this is another trophy for every competitor sort of approach. And it's absolutely not. USADA really values competition. We believe in healthy competition as a really beneficial part of sport and larger society. And we just want to make sure that that competition is happening ethically and in a fair and just way. So I really appreciate the way that our team, the way that USADA as a whole, the way that our leadership and board leadership really backs up this idea that investing in sport culture, one that values clean, ethical, fair competition, that places athlete health, well-being, and advocacy at the front of the discussion. You get that right, and all of a sudden the other decisions become a lot easier to make. Because if that's your anchor point, if that's your North Star, if athlete health, well-being, and success is your North Star, then the decisions about the specifics become much more clear.
Well, that makes sense, Jen. And I know incorporating athletes into all of the work that you're doing at USADA is critically important and something that you emphasize as well. So can you talk a little bit about how the TrueSport program, and as well as other initiatives at USADA, really work to engage athletes and help raise awareness in general for clean sport?
I love the way that we engage with athletes. It's one of my favorite parts of the work that we do. We are intentional in the day-to-day. When I get the opportunity to look at the 3 teams I work with, there is not a brainstorming session. There is not a planning session. There is not an execution on the deliverables that does not include a question about, what does this mean for athletes? What does this do for athletes? What do they need that we can help support here? How does this support ethical participation in sport? That lens is a part of all of our decision-making organizationally, but specific to the TrueSport team, we have developed a group of athlete ambassadors who are up-and-comers in many cases, or they are Team USA. They are folks who are actively competing and who are engaged in living the values that TrueSport espouses. They are great representations of ethical participation in sport. They are all about great sport culture. They are living accountability, respect, teamwork. They are all about setting healthy goals and pursuing them and developing and demonstrating resilience when they fall short. Like, they are living the values that TrueSport espouses. And to give them a leg up and to give them an opportunity to have a broader platform to share their voice, they bring credibility to those discussions that if I show up and talk about it with a group of high school athletes or collegiate athletes or little kids, I have zero street cred with them. But to have a Team USA athlete step in and say, hey, here's how I've managed to deal with this difficult situation. All of a sudden, athlete to athlete, they have a connection, they have credibility, they have a lot more wow factor, and they're just great people. We've brought in some people who are phenomenal athletes. Again, if you want to check out our athlete ambassador program, it is on truesport.org. We're super proud of the athletes we've brought in. They have phenomenal stories to tell. They have incredible athletic experiences to share and deeply wonderful humans on top of that. They're just great. And they engage with young athletes because they believe in inspiring the next generation. So our opportunities are just to try to find those athletes, connect well with them, elevate their voices, and celebrate the things that they give back to the next generation. We have had periods of time where we've done Athlete of the Month awards, where we want to recognize grassroots athletes. We are developing some programs now that I can't quite share yet, but I'm excited and we'll be excited to share later in 2026. That will be about athlete voice at the grassroots level and having young athletes feel that they've got a platform to share what they're feeling and seeing and experiencing and celebrating their accomplishments as well. So basically, at every turn, we try to think about our end goal is making us better for young athletes, and how do we elevate their voices and how do we bring athlete voice to the conversation to make sure that we're sticking true to our North Star.
Definitely. And I think the work that you're doing, the problems that you're trying to solve are very broad and very challenging and very complex. And there's sort of all these different moving pieces. So can you share a little bit, Jen, about how your past experiences working in education, all of these different settings that you worked in, maybe inform and shape the work that you're doing there at USADA today?
It's been so fun to take educational theory and have it in practice on a big scale. Coming out of classroom and university teaching, you get the opportunity to engage with athletes, either as a coach, and you've got a team that you can help influence and support. You got classroom experience, whatever that is. It's really exciting to have that day-to-day grassroots involvement, but I love the opportunity to do this at a bigger scale. And that's been where I've seen understanding of audience needs, bringing the sort of pedagogical or andragogical, depending on what our audience is. So whether we're educating young people or we're educating young adults, just making sure that we are using what we know about how people learn and retain lessons and great information to engage around a topic that is important to these athletes, to make sure that we're not just bringing them important information, but we're delivering it in a way that is consumable, that is interesting, and that will hopefully be something that sticks with them beyond that engagement. And that has been something that's been really important for me coming from my background, is just to make sure that we're grounded in educational practice and theory that makes these lessons palatable and exciting.
Definitely. And I think this aspect of bringing in the theory and the evidence base for the education initiatives and how you develop and structure them is critically important, as well as just incorporating new research from anti-doping science more generally. So can you talk about why it's so important to continue to advance anti-doping science in your perspective, and how you incorporate some of these new findings into the TrueSport program and other USADA education initiatives?
The science of anti-doping is fascinating. And I'm assuming your listeners already know that because they are tuned into the PCC's podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But the science and the way that we are pushing the boundaries between what dopers might choose to engage in and what we can detect through testing and monitoring is just so fascinating. And it is a rapidly evolving field. It is, I won't pretend to be an analytical scientist. We have great folks on staff here who are, but I wouldn't insult Dr. Matt Fedorik or Dr. Amy Agner by pretending that I am them. But I will say it's really important to know that we've got great scientists who are pushing the field and inviting research and making sure that that growth is happening, because we certainly know that for folks who do choose to compete in an unethical way, they're certainly pushing the boundaries. And we want to make sure the science is as aggressively pushing the boundaries of what we can find, understand, detect, and protect against. We use that information internally to also make sure that the materials we're giving to young people are growing and evolving over time. There's a ton of substances that are now available widely, readily, easily, sadly, to young people because of their access to the internet that we want to make sure we're getting in front of, not just because it's an ethical discussion, but because it is a health and safety issue that is terrifying. As a parent of young athletes and as somebody who cares about developmental athletes, there's just a lot out there that if we aren't doing a great job educating about, we have abandoned kids to the wild west of not regulated substances and poorly regulated information sharing. And so we just want to be really thoughtful about the fact that the science that's happening at these very elite levels may feel like it's out of the realm of something that should be interesting for a parent of a middle school athlete. But actually what we're learning there translates into safety and really important developmental messages for young people, because it's a little alarming. Well, that's an understatement. It's not a little alarming. It terrifies me. I mean, it's the thing that I wake up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat about. Is it that they have access to stuff that is not just like a bad idea, but is potentially deadly and permanently damaging to their health and well-being. And the fact that we don't have adequate education out there for that demographic would be a massive misstep from USADA's perspective. And so we're doing our best to get that messaging out as well, because we believe that that's impactful and that it matters.
Certainly. And I know throughout our conversation, Jen, we've touched on just some of the collaborations and some of the partnerships and stakeholders that USADA works with, including the Partnership for Clean Competition on the research side. So can you talk a little bit more about why these partnerships and collaborations are so important and how you manage them all?
It is the lifeblood of the work that we do at TrueSport. It is absolutely how we, as I mentioned before, sort of force multiply and scale the work that we do. And it helps us keep our ear to the ground. We can't be all places at all times. We don't know every cutting edge thing that's happening or every challenge that's being faced by young athletes out there. So we're really dependent on our partners to help us keep our finger on the pulse of what's new, what's challenging, what are folks dealing with that they could use support around. So we see these partnerships as really collaborative. We try to be incredibly authentic and mutually supportive partners with folks. And let me give you an example that was, I think, a really great evolution of a partnership. We work with a soccer club in LA, and early in last year, we faced alongside of our partners the challenges they had around the fires in LA. The Pacific Palisades area in particular was where this club is located. And knowing that we support mental health and well-being, knowing that we support community strength and how sport can be a protective factor, they reached out and we talked to them and we were like, okay, how can we support you? That partnership helped us identify a problem, which was a globally aware problem. This is not something that was a surprise. However, we didn't necessarily understand the implications for their community. Their practice fields were gone. The way that they could get to practice was gone. They were displaced. How would they build community, retain community? They were desperately in need of some normalcy. How could sport be a part of that return to normalcy? So we spoke with a couple of our experts, Dr. Kevin Chapman and Dr. Debbie Gilboa, who are both really great at resilience and clinical psychology. And how do we kind of use sport to build some tools here? And we put on very quickly, with very little lead time, we acted quickly, jumped on it, and we put together a webinar for that club team. And we invited anybody else in the country that needed to hear this information to join us. And it was a really successful opportunity to talk to folks about how sport can support community in the case of shared community-wide trauma. And it was really meaningful and it was incredibly useful for that audience. And then tragically, shortly thereafter, USA Figure Skating and the figure skating community experienced an absolutely horrific trauma in the loss of a number of their athletes. And the timing was so vitally important. And what a horrible thing to have had happen, and how heart-wrenching as a sport community to know that this was a need. But we were so grateful that that partnership, the root of that authentic, open, transparent partnership, had given us insight into how we could support one group in a problem area that then ended up having ripple effects across the sport community. It's that kind of experience that we find in lots of different examples where those partnerships are really rich and meaningful, and they have larger impact than we could have ever imagined on the front side.
Definitely. And I think these resources, these initiatives that you're undertaking are providing assistance for problems that people may not even think about when they're thinking about the traditional issues with sport, clean sport, anti-doping, these things that we've been talking about throughout our conversation. But this element of community and resilience, I think, is equally important. And I love talking to guests about the unresolved issues in sport and anti-doping. So Jen, if we gave you all of the resources you could dream up, you could have the biggest team you want, all of the money, all of the resources. What is one problem in anti-doping that you would most want to solve?
Gosh, with all the resources, all the support, all the money, all the team, all the things, I would resolve the fact that our young people are being targeted for messaging around unregulated substances and these supplement stacks, things that are being sold through unregulated pharmacies online, that it is a documented fact that this is not a safe pathway to get access to substances. And they are receiving information about this based on auto feed in their social media engagement. They are seeing influencers that look incredibly credible, and they don't know how dangerous that world can be. If I could solve something, it would be that. Yesterday. I would solve it yesterday.
Well, I'm right there with you, Jen. I think this is a tremendous problem in sport and anti-doping, and something that I think the team at USADA and many others around the world are working together to try to find solutions for. So we appreciate you bringing this to everyone's awareness today. And we've talked about a lot of different wonderful resources that TrueSport and USADA provide. So if our listeners want to learn more, Jen, about you, your team, and some of the resources we talked about today, what is the best way for them to do that?
Best way to do that is to check us out at TrueSport.org. You can also email us. There's an email link on the website. If you could just get to that hub of the website, you can get to everything else. But reach out to us. As I mentioned, small team. We have an email address that you can send us an inquiry at. That's how we make a lot of great connections with folks who just have questions. Because we are a dedicated small team, I promise you'll hear from us. If you reach out and send us an email, we'll reach out. We love to come out to support clubs, to support sport teams and schools. We have lots of opportunities to partner, to bring ambassadors out, to do presentations, to do trainings for coaches. We have parent academies that we do. Lots of great ways to engage. All you have to do is raise your hand and connect with us, and we will figure out a way to support the initiatives you have as a sport program. For folks who maybe are joining on this podcast who are like, actually, that's not my world right now. I have a different focus. I guarantee you know somebody in your life who is engaged in youth sport. And for you, I would just say, gosh, pass our stuff along. Let them know that we exist. We are, as I mentioned, a small nonprofit trying to take over the world with sport goodness. And that sometimes is a challenge. We don't have a huge PR team. We're not out there running billboards and ads on the Super Bowl. So the awareness piece really matters to us. So please share. reach out to us, ask questions. We will respond and we will look for ways to support you individually. And if you aren't currently a youth sport parent, coach, or athlete, or admin, or anybody who's kind of got your foot in that space, share it with someone who does, because there's a wealth of information and support waiting to be had. And we're excited to share it.
Well, Jen, I love that. Listeners, definitely take a moment to check out the TrueSport.org website, learn more, share, get connected, and start that conversation. And Jen, it's been so wonderful to have a conversation with you today. I truly appreciate your time and the insights that you've shared with us.
Marie, thanks so much. I've really had a great time talking today and look forward to getting to know the listeners when they reach out and connect with TrueSport.
Wonderful. Well, Jen, thank you again so much for your time. Listeners, it's been wonderful to have you here with us as well. If you haven't already, it would mean so much to all of us if you could take a moment to rate and review and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. And please note that the Anti-Doping Podcast features a wide variety of clean sport experts, and episodes may include statements and/or viewpoints that do not necessarily reflect the views or values of the PCC. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Anti-Doping Podcast.